We are continuing our plein air painting up in Gloucester, Massachusetts at the Gloucester Marine Railway, which is a facility where they restore boats that have aged, that need repairs. In this case, we're looking at a specific boat, the Boston Pilot, that's up on dry dock, and it's a very intriguing shape on first glance. This is the first study that I've done, and it's a tonal study done in black and white, the white being the paper. And I used a single color, neutral tint, and in looking at the subject, try to discern three values: major dark, a mid-tone, and then leaving lights. So I sketched out some simple lines, more specific lines within the boat itself. The boat is a complex object, especially one up on dry dock. There's symmetry to it, and there are some difficult lines with boats. Beautiful lines. They're beautiful lines, but they're often difficult, especially if the boat is at a perspective, certain perspective, the way it is today. And I'm starting with some very light washes, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, a little bit of cerulean blue, and thinking about the whites that I'm leaving, thinking about the angle of the surfaces that I'm describing with these strokes, and the very pale tones of the surface that's facing the sky. I continue that on the left side and towards the back, setting the light notes or the light tones. And this subject that I want to talk about in relation to the Boston Pilot is tonal values, or another term we use, lights and darks. And it's a very important part of our toolkit, what we use to simplify our motif and to dramatize our motif. Lights and darks play a key role in that. So that's one of the reasons I like to begin with a simple monotone, monochrome study, thinking about 3 tones and white, so a total of 4 tones, really simplifying the subject. And that simplicity eventually transfers into the final painting. Even though the color is changing and is varied, I'm still thinking about a simplicity in the lights and darks. And this gives me an advantage, I feel, in describing the subject and proceeding with the watercolor. One advantage is that we group things. We see things that are similar in front of us as one. For example, the shadow underneath the boat. It's broken and it's varied, but I try to see it as one shape. Or the boat itself, while there's many surfaces and planes and lines, I will endeavor to describe it as sort of a monolithic presence with a few highlights here and there and some extensions of the form, but basically keeping the tonality the same throughout. And this applies to other minor elements as well, looking for a way to join like values, I guess, is a good way to describe it. And this helps to simplify the subject and give it a certain strength. And if I notice that my darks are scattered and kind of isolated from each other, I'll look for a way to join them. I'll look for something that connects them. It might be a line or a board or a shadow, and I'll connect them. The same goes for the lights. If I notice my lights are very scattered and broken, I'll seek out ways to connect them. And this gives the painting a simplicity and an integrity. And it's, again, a way of simplifying the subject. Another strength of tonal values is that you're thinking less about matching color, more about matching light and dark. And I think this is a big challenge with watercolor. Sometimes it's a impossible challenge to match color. And I know that in my classes, it's a big concern of students is trying to match color. And I try to, in my painting, demonstrate that it's enough to match the value. The color is a variable. You can freely substitute colors, in fact, and the painting will still have a beauty to it. And sometimes that beauty is strengthened by your interpretation of the color or your play on the color. I feel for my work right now, as long as I get the lights and darks presented in a meaningful way, in a strong way, and seek ways to join those lights and darks and create an integrated shape, my painting has been successful. You can see this, what I'm doing now is that boat has extended into the shadow. And on first glance of the subject, it might not be that apparent. But when I look at the subject, I'm blurring my vision, I'm squinting, in other words, trying to formulate ways to connect the shadow, the boards, and the boat. And you can see how that shape, that strong, dark shape is evolving in this painting. And I'll continue that process up through the left and over to the right before finishing. So when you're looking at your subject, when I'm looking at my subject, I'm actively looking for ways to not only simplify the tones, but to join like tones. We're very good at seeing divisions in things or seeing the separateness of things. I think the artist is often choosing a different track and trying to see connections in things, visual connections, and make the most of those in the painting. So that's a strategy that I've adopted and use in today's subject. Another reason to work with tonal values is it helps to keep you out of trouble. When we're making our plan, or my tonal study, as you saw in the beginning, some areas are visually confusing, not necessarily in that study, but in the motif, when we're looking at the motif. Things, and often the reason that these areas are visually confusing is because the tones are similar, like the tone of the building in the distance is very similar to the tone in the boat and foreground, and does not allow us to see the boat with clarity, at least the front edge or the prow of the boat. And so I've taken a liberty with that and made that distant building, even though it's backlit, I've made it much paler than it is in reality, for the sole purpose of giving myself a strong focal center right under the boat, where the light is passing laterally and behind some of the rigging and board work that I'm painting now. And I've used tonal values to help create that center of interest. So if you're of the mind that you should have a center of interest in your painting or a main focal point, tonal values, lights and darks, especially dark against light, is a very reliable way to create that. And I'm using that in an exaggerated way today. I use it for a minor center of interest also, and in the lower right-hand lower corner, lower bottom part of the painting, it's sort of a lead-in, but I've left a bright area there, as well as on the left side, a small bright area indicating the angle of the shadow as minor focal centers. The main one is right under the boat, and I'm saving that space to put figures. So tonal values are useful in that way also. In this painting, in fact, I've exaggerated that area for that reason. So it's another strategy that I think works well for us in painting. And so it helps to keep us out of trouble. These are good reasons to do a tonal study, to think about lights and darks. And for the watercolorist, working with a single color has other advantages, more so than perhaps another media. One of those advantages is that light and dark directly translates into the thickness of the paint or the paint consistency. When we're working with light tones, no matter what the color, the paint consistency is very, very liquidy. It's very watery. When we work with mid-tones, the paint has a certain thickness to it. It becomes thicker, moves a little slower, is a little heavier. And when we're using dark accents, a very strong color, thick color, dark color, the paint is almost right from the tube and is very, very thick, almost like butter. So these are things that benefit the watercolorist working with a tonal study and thinking about paint consistency. That'll translate into the color work. The colors in this painting are very simple, three basically, using ultramarine blue, neutral tint, and burnt sienna, and varying those colors, especially in the shadows. I'm playing with the color a little more, staying with grays to the periphery of the painting. I will probably even use a touch of red in the figures or some other parts near my focal center, my center of interest, just as an attraction, a color attraction. Or, yeah, it is describing the local color as well. So here, all this brushwork that you see, all this play of color and edge and brushwork in the painting is leading up to these figures, which give the whole scene a proper scale. And I was planning ahead to include them. That's why I'm leaving that light area through the bottom of the boat. And it's the scene that you see when you encounter the marine railway of Gloucester on a working day. It's a very busy place and a very fun place to visit. Finishing up the edges, painting is basically done, and I'm really enjoying the pattern of brushwork, the abstract quality to the painting. I remember the light of the day as I'm looking at it, and happy with the overall painting. You'll notice I didn't put any words on the back. I contemplated it, but feel it's not going to really benefit this painting, and so I'm going to leave them out. And I hope you learn a little bit about tonal values and how they can help you in your watercolor painting.